Good day, everyone. Welcome back to Parasitology. This is the continued discussion for Lesson 3, Phylum Nemathelminthes, focusing on hookworms, Strongyloides, and miscellaneous intestinal nematodes. I know we are already done with the introduction to hookworms, but for the purpose of a complete discussion through this video, daanan lang natin na mabilis. What are hookworms? They are blood-sucking nematodes. I'll just flash everything. Ayan. And then in the previous meeting, we learned that there are two species under this group of parasites, which is Ancylostoma duodenale and Necator americanus. Later, we will be discussing animal hookworms naman. But for now, ayan, these are the hookworms that naturally infect humans ayan, as their host. The habitat would be the small intestine. Mode of transmission is skin penetration. That is why this group of parasites are a bit set apart from our previous discussion because previously we talked about parasites that are ingested, diba? Yung embryonated eggs nila are ingested. This time, they enter the human host via skin penetration. Infective stage is the filariform larva, and then diagnostic stage would be the egg. As for the morphology of the egg, it is described to be thin-shelled. So they are thin-shelled eggs. Under the larval stages, there are two larval stages for hookworms, the rhabditiform. This is also described as the early larval stage. It's also described as the feeding stage, where the mouth is open. The infective larval stage of hookworms would be the filariform, and it's also known as a non-feeding stage. Pag non-feeding, the mouth is already closed and it is ready to hunt for its human victim. This stage of hookworms would be found in the upper layers of the soil so that when you walk barefoot in the soil, it would be easy to penetrate your skin. Previously, we also discussed how the morphology of the rhabditiform larvae of Strongyloides and hookworms can be used to identify their species because what did we say again before? The eggs of Strongyloides and hookworms are indistinguishable or they are completely identical. That is why when you view eggs under the microscope, you won't be able to tell really what species that is. That is why we use, diba, the Harada Mori method so that we can culture the egg, we can allow them to hatch, and then when the rhabditiform emerges, we can view them under the microscope and check kung ano yung identity nila based on the traits that we have discussed. So for this one, ayan, it is known to have, or the rhabditiform larvae of hookworms are known to be larger than Strongyloides, thinner than Strongyloides. The buccal cavity is longer, and then the genital primordium is smaller than Strongyloides. Paano naman pag between hookworms, between Ancylostoma and Necator americanus? We can also use this table to identify their differences. We already discussed this before, kaya kindly review na lang po ang morphology ng Ancylostoma duodenale and Necator americanus. Let's now go to the life cycle. In the life cycle, it's a bit similar to Ascaris because it also has lung migration. In fact, not only lung, but it can also, syempre sa side trip na siya, it can also cause heart migration. But for the natural, kumbaga the basic life cycle of Trichoris, para siyang Ascaris because it also needs to go to the lungs before it enters its final habitat, which is the small intestine. Okay, babilisan lang. How do we start? Syempre, infection begins with the penetration of the filariform larva in the skin. Because it is under the skin, it can have access to our circulation via our blood vessels. So they swim in the blood vessels until they reach the lungs. From the lungs, they cross the alveoli, they climb up the respiratory tract, and then it will prompt the victim to cough. Syempre, medyo parang barado, parang may laman yung throat mo, diba? Or yung pharynx mo. So you will cough, ejecting the larva in your mouth. So once it is the mouth, you will tend to swallow it. And when you swallow, it will now go to the gastrointestinal tract, going to the intestine, and finally reaching its final habitat. So the filariform can now become full adults. The male and female adults will copulate and reproduce, releasing the eggs in your intestine. So once they release the eggs will be washed away through your stool sample. Lalabas na siya sa stool sample. And when your stool sample or when the fecal matter reaches the soil, it would be very ideal for this worm and or for this parasite. The egg will hatch, the rhabditiform will repeat the life cycle. It will become filariform, go to the upper layers of the soil and wait for its next human host or human victim. So very simple lang, very direct ang life cycle ng hookworms. Once it reaches the soil, the eggs typically hatch after 1 to 2 days. And then within 7 to 10 days, the rhabditiform will become infective or it will become filariform. For the diagnosis, syempre, we can use the routine method, direct fecal smear. We can also use concentration techniques. Cat-to-cat, ano sabi natin about the egg? It is thin-shelled or they are thin-shelled eggs. That is why it is not that appropriate or this method is not that appropriate. But if you will really use it, kunyari kailangan mo talaga, you need to perform egg counting. You have to work fast or you have to read your slide within 30 to 60 minutes or before 30 minutes kailangan binabasa mo na siya. Culture method, what is the purpose of this test? If you want to identify the species, is it hookworm or Strongyloides? What is the setup for this test again? Diba? We use a filter paper, we smear the sample in the filter paper and then put it in water or dip the paper in water so it will create the humid environment that your eggs need. After that, magka-hatch sila and you can pick out or you can extract the rhabditiform and view them under the microscope. In other references or in most references, they would use the direction of the larval migration to determine the species. Sabi nila kapag pababa yung migration ng larva, it's hookworm. Kapag pataas naman, it's Stercoralis. But while this is true, it's not absolute or we cannot depend on that alone. We still need to do the microscopic examination. Okay. A while ago, we mentioned ano ba yung mga na-inhabit ng hookworm in our body. Siyempre, yung skin muna, nagpunta muna siya doon. And then it went to the lungs. And then finally, it went to the final habitat, which is the small intestine. So while it is still under the skin, it can cause irritation and itching, pamumula, pangangate, di ba? At pamamaga, ayan. So it can cause ground, dew, or coolie itch. They're all the same. So when you answer your question in the quizzes, just use ground itch, dew itch, coolie itch. All of them will be the same. It also causes miner's disease since most people who work with the soil are miners. And pag nandun na siya sa lungs, syempre it will cause inflammation of the lung tissue causing Wakana disease or pneumonitis and also bronchitis. And then when it reaches the final habitat, the small intestine, it can cause abdominal pain and steatorrhea. But in addition to this, we also noted that hookworms are blood-sucking nematodes, meaning they get their nutrients from our blood. So they attach to our intestinal mucosa and then suck the blood that can be found there. Therefore, after significant length or duration of infection, it can cause iron deficiency anemia. Ay, mababa na yung hemoglobin mo or RBC count kasi kinain na niya lahat. It can also cause hypoalbuminemia, which is these are the proteins or loss of proteins that are in the plasma. So, habang kinakain niya yung RBC hemoglobin mo, medyo may nasama na ding protein, kaya it causes hypoalbuminemia. Here in the Philippines, the more prevalent parasite would be Necator, and the population at risk would be the farmers or then again those that work in the soil. Factors for transmission would be putting your fecal matter in the soil or using it as a fertilizer, right? And then not wearing shoes, walking barefoot, and environmental factors. Kapag medyo humid or medyo moist ang ating soil, it favors their development. Paratenic hosts may include rabbits, lambs, calves, and pigs, but paratenic means these animals do not contribute to their development. Additional mode of transmission for Ancylostoma, medyo strong si Ancylostoma. Pwede mo din siyang makain. Ayan. When you ingest the larva. Transmammary, we already talked about this, where larva has been found in the breast milk of mothers. And then, ano yung sabi natin sa case before? Yung baby, di ba, nahawa siya after breastfeeding. And then, pwede din siya sa transplacental. So, hindi pa pinapanganak yung anak. Yung baby, it already crossed the placental barrier or the placental route, infecting the unborn child. Treatment may be albendazole, mebendazole, and parental pamoate, but the drug of choice would be albendazole. Since this parasite causes iron deficiency anemia, we can also prescribe, or as the doctor, you can also prescribe iron supplement to alleviate the side effects of this infection. Okay, sabi natin, Necator and Ancylostoma are human hookworms. Meron din tayong animal hookworms. And the thing about animal hookworms is that because their natural host or intended host are animals, pag tayo yung napasukan nila, hindi niya alam. Basta penetrate lang ng penetrate, nakarating siya sa human, which is not its intended host. What will happen to us? So for the worms, since we are not the intended host, their life cycle could not be completed. Okay, hindi natin sila mapapalaki or mapapadevelop into adults. And so they get stuck under our skin. So they get stuck under their skin and they cause cutaneous larva migrans. So doon lang sila pagala-gala. Kasi parang they cannot find their way because we are not the natural host. So they just stay under the skin, causing cutaneous larva migrans or creeping eruption. In some cases, they would also enter our muscles. So pwede din yun. Pero hindi sila makakarating ng lungs, hindi sila makakarating ng intestine, hindi din sila magiging adults. Examples for animal hookworms include Ancylostoma brasiliense, which is the cat hookworm, and Ancylostoma caninum, which is the dog hookworm. From its name, ito na po yung natural host nila or intended host, cats and dogs. When it comes to morphology naman, how do we identify them? For Ancylostoma brasiliense, they are known for 2 pairs of teeth. 2 pairs of teeth. And then for Ancylostoma caninum, they are known for 3 pairs of teeth. Again, Ancylostoma brasiliense, 2 pairs of teeth. But in order for us to differentiate brasiliense from duodenale, we add another adjective. For brasiliense, they have 2 pairs of uneven teeth. Hindi daw pantay. And then for caninum, 3 pairs of teeth. Para mas matandaan, duodenale, so it's duo. It has 2 pairs of teeth. Brasiliense, it starts with letter B. So B is the second letter of the alphabet. That's why it has 2 pairs of teeth also. And then caninum, it starts with letter C, which is the third letter of the alphabet. Kaya 3 pairs of teeth. And this is what cutaneous larva migrants would look like. Andyan lang sila sa subcutaneous tissue. For some, they may also enter the skeletal muscles. Ayan, 2 pairs of teeth. And then 3 pairs of teeth. Another important hookworm would be Ancylostoma caelanicum, and this was observed naman from a civet cat. This is what a civet cat looks like. And it is usually confused as Ancylostoma brasiliense. It has been described as the hookworms of cats and dogs in Asia, and then the second most common hookworm infecting humans. So recently, after studies, na-realize nila, sumisikat tong Ancylostoma caelanicum. It's becoming the second most common hookworm infection. Right? Particularly, nakalagay po dito, Southeast Asia and Oceania. Ayan. Kaya, ayan na sila. So, that is it for the hookworms. We now go to Strongyloides stercoralis. Strongyloides stercoralis has been described as the smallest nematode in man. It's known to be facultative, meaning it has a free living cycle and a parasitic cycle. The host is man, habitat is small intestine, same pa din naman ang mode of transmission and infective stage. However, for the diagnostic stage, makita natin dito that it's not the egg that is seen in stool samples. Instead, it's the rhabditiform larva. Again, diagnostic stage is rhabditiform larva. The common name for Strongyloides stercoralis is threadworm. Kasi small, parang sinulid, threadworm. Ganun pa din, it shares the similar characteristics as hookworms because again, they are identical or indistinguishable. For the rhabditiform larva, opposite lang lahat ng sinabi natin. Smaller size, longer esophagus, thicker tail, shorter buccal cavity, and larger genital primordium. To summarize everything and to show the comparison between hookworms and rhabditiforms, it's better to focus on this slide. Ito na po yung table. Paki-memorize na po ang table na to because it's going to be important in your future assessments. Paano naman pag filariform? Can we also compare the two parasites? The answer is yes, pwede. Just look at the esophagus. The esophagus of Strongyloides is longer. Ayan. And the tail is notched. Meron tayong picture mamaya, but the tail of Strongyloides is notched compared to the pointed tail of hookworms. It's the non-feeding stage. O pag non-feeding, anong itsura ng mouth? Closed. It's small kasi it's the smallest nematode and it has a distinct cleft at the tip of the tail or notched tail. So ito, closed na yung mouth niya, non-feeding na siya. That is why this is really the infective kasi hindi na siya pwede sa soil lang. Kailangan na niya ng someone na magsusupply sa kanya ng nutrients na kailangan niya. So filariform is the one that needs the host in order to complete its life cycle. This is the appearance of the notched tail. Oops. Okay. For the morphological characteristics of the adult, sabi natin, Strongyloides would have the free living cycle and the parasitic cycle. For the free-living adults, they are shorter and they have a muscular esophagus. But for the parasitic females, I want you to focus here. Ayan. The mode of reproduction of parasitic females would be ovoviviparous, meaning they lay down embryonated eggs in the intestine. Mamaya babalikan natin yun kasi it's important in the life cycle. Not only that, female parasitic adults are also parthenogenetic. They are parthenogenetic, meaning they can fertilize their own eggs. They don't need a male adult. Again, female Strongyloides parasitic adults are parthenogenetic, meaning they can fertilize their own eggs. Hindi nila kailangan ng male adult. Although merong mga male adults in the free living cycle, ayan, yung mga doon na lumaki sa soil, nagiging male adult sila. But in the parasitic world or in the parasitic cycle, they are not needed or only female adults would be seen most of the time in the intestine. This also has an effect in our life cycle and pathogenesis, kaya we'll go to this again later. Again, free-living adults or adult males exist, but they are free-living. They are not found in the intestine. And then again, ventrally curved tail kasi male nematodes would always have curved or coiled tails, while female adults would have pointed tails. For the life cycle, mas complex siya compared sa hookworms, but let us discuss them from the start. So infection begins with the penetration. Yung penetration going to the lungs and going to the small intestine, it's very the same or it's very similar to hookworms, which is skip na natin yun. Ayan. But then again, skin, tapos circulation, pumunta sa lungs, niluwa, or inubo, nilunok, nandun na siya agad sa small intestine. So fast forward na tayo dito. In the small intestine, the parasite or filariform become adults. And as you can see here, walang male adult kasi hindi niya kailangan yun. Ang kailangan niya lang ay sarili niya because it is parthenogenetic. Okay, if it's parthenogenetic, it will fertilize its own eggs, and when they release the eggs, because they are ovoviviparous, the eggs are already embryonated and mature and ready to hatch while it is still inside the intestine of the um, patient. Now, because it is already ready to hatch or mature, mag-hatch na siya. While inside the intestine, the rhabditiform larva can already hatch and migrate to the intestinal lumen. When that happens, it has two fates. It could either be released or excreted via the stool, sasama na siya sa fecal matter ng patient, or it can decide to stay and cause auto-infection. Ayan. This parasite is capable of auto-infection. How does it do that? So when the rhabditiform larva decides to stay, gusto niya dito na lang siya, in the large intestine or the intestinal lumen, it can repeat all of the earlier steps that we discussed. So nandun na siya sa intestine, it can penetrate the mucosa, and migrate. So return to the circulation, return to the lungs, you cough it up again, and then swallow it again. So it can complete its life cycle without ever leaving the body. So that is a case of auto-infection where the person becomes its own source of infection. Ayan. So that this adds to the parang severity or to the persistence of Strongyloides infection in humans. Kapag naman it is washed away in the stool, ayun, nakalabas ng stool, the rhabditiform also has two fates. It can enter a parasitic life cycle or a free-living cycle. If it decides to be a free-living parasite, the rhabditiform directly matures into adults. This time, itong mga rhabditiform na to, dahil nasa soil na siya, meron na siyang, or it can develop into a male or a female adult. These adults would copulate and fertilize, producing another batch of worms or eggs. The eggs will hatch, and then the rhabditiform will emerge, and then it will become parasitic na, or it can develop into filariform and become parasitic. So doon yun sa free living cycle. However, the newly released rhabditiform can also decide, ay parang ayoko maging adult. Parang di ko trip yun. Sige, I'll become a filariform na lang ulit. So when the rhabditiform becomes a filariform, it will become a parasitic nematode and repeat all of the steps that we discussed earlier. So dito, just to summarize, the eggs or the rhabditiform has two fates while inside the intestine. It can be released in the stool, or it can repeat the infection via auto-infection. For the rhabditiform in the soil naman, it also has two fates. It can become a filariform and become parasitic, or adults and become free-living. So marami siyang choices. Diagnostic methods may include, ganun pa din, direct fecal smear, concentration test, but here are the methods that we discussed in lesson 2, the Behrman funnel technique. I hope you remember that. The entero test, ito yung lumulunok ng capsule with the thread. Harada-Mori culture and duodenal aspiration are also available techniques. We can also use serological or immunoassay techniques, but it is not recommended for filariasis endemic areas because cross-reaction can happen. For the pathogenesis and clinical manifestation, sabi nga natin, it is capable of auto-infection. What do you call the disease? By the way, it's strongyloidiasis, but it is also referred to as Vietnam diarrhea or Cochin China diarrhea. Bakit Vietnam or Cochin China? Because way back in the 1800s, sa mga panahon ng mga gera, there was an outbreak of strongyloidiasis among the soldiers who are fighting in the war. Ayun. So, kawawa naman sila, no? Nagbabarilan sila, but at the same time, dinadiarrhea sila. Kaya, Vietnam diarrhea and Cochin China diarrhea is the nickname for strongyloidiasis today. Strongyloides nematodes are very powerful. So, they can also cause ulcers. That is why they create a honeycomb appearance of the intestinal mucosa. They can also cause ulcerative, kasi nga ulcer, colitis. When they are in the lungs, they can also cause pneumonitis. And because the intestinal mucosa is already damaged, it can cause malabsorption with steatorrhea. The infection is more severe in immunocompromised individuals, yung mga may affected or decreased immunity or meron silang affected immune system. And when this happens, strongyloides can cause opportunistic complications. Meaning, itong mga complications, hindi talaga natin to nakikita in healthy individuals. But because they reside in, kumbaga, very sensitive humans, kasi compromised yung immune system nila, nagkakaroon ng added manifestations. Ang tawag doon ay opportunistic complication. Now, your reading assignment is to look at your textbook and check what are these added complications for immunocompromised individuals. Does it cause hyperinfection? Do they cause disseminated infection? Kindly read about them in your textbook. And then lastly, for the treatment, you can use albendazole and ivermectin. For the epidemiology, this is prevalent in tropical and subtropical areas with heavy rainfall. It has a lower prevalence than hookworm, a more persistent infection than hookworm due to auto-infection, and thankfully, this parasite is rare in the Philippines. Meron din tayong mga zoonotic or animal Strongyloides worms. We have 3, Strongyloides fuelborni, Strongyloides nutria, Strongyloides procyonis, and Strongyloides myopotami. For Strongyloides fuelborni, it is found in monkeys. Strongyloides procyonis found in raccoons, and Strongyloides myopotami found in nutria. Ganun pa din, since they are for animals talaga, when they penetrate our skin, they cause creeping eruption or swamp itch. For Strongyloides fuelborni, kindly read na lang on the information presented on the slide. The life cycle of Strongyloides fuelborni is much similar to Strongyloides stercoralis, but there are a few exceptions. Number 1, kanina, dog yung alternative host ng Strongyloides stercoralis. Dito naman, monkeys or primates. Ayun, monkeys. That's one. And then, another one is the diagnostic stage. So, dito, eggs pa din yung lumalabas sa stool sample, not rhabditiform. So here, they are still parthenogenetic, but this time, the eggs are still embryonated, but this time they hatch in the soil or they hatch in the environment. They don't hatch in the intestine. So that's the second key difference between fuelborni and stercoralis. And that ends our discussion for hookworms and strongyloides. Now we go to the miscellaneous. Miscellaneous intestinal nematodes. We have 2 more, Trichostrongylus and Anisakis species. For Trichostrongylus, they are also known as pseudo hookworms. Because their eggs are similar to hookworms, but they are not hookworms, or they have a really different life cycle. These are parasites of herbivores. Human infection is accidental, and these are very important or clinically significant species. Mode of transmission is ingestion, and the habitat is small intestine. Infective stage is filariform, and the diagnostic stage would be the egg. Okay, ayan, example kung bakit hindi talaga siya hookworm at bakit pseudo hookworm lang siya. If we check the mode of transmission, it is ingested. Okay, they are not acquired via skin penetration. Next, paano tayo nakakakuha ng Trichostrongylus? It is when we ingest contaminated vegetation, yung mga gulay-gulay na kakabunot pa lang sa soil. Ayan, tapos hindi nahugasan na maayos, we can acquire Trichostrongylus filariform larva. For the life cycle naman, very simple lang, very direct. It's like trichoris. So, nilunok. Ayan, filariform is swallowed. It goes to the small intestine. They become adults. They release they copulate, they fertilize, and then release eggs back into the soil or through the feces. Ganun lang po siya kasimple. Pathogenesis, ito medyo similar pa siya sa hookworm because they also eat blood or they also ingest blood. So they cause blood loss. And then the treatment naman is mebendazole. For the eggs, they resemble the hookworm, but they are larger and have more pointed eggs. This is the picture of Trichostrongylus egg, and then this one is for the hookworm naman. And then our last miscellaneous parasite is Anisakis species. Meron siyang mga relatives that would cause a similar infection, but one of the most common would be Anisakis simplex. Again, Anisakis simplex. Common name is codworm or herring worm, and these are parasites that can be acquired via ingesting raw or undercooked fish. Here are the important information. Kindly take note na lang. We'll discuss them naman when we go to the life cycle. Compared to other parasites, the larva of Anisakis is a bit large and they can be seen or pwede mo siya makita kasi it can already reach centimeters when it comes to length. Kaya, ayun. Kaya titignan nyo yung mga isdang binibili nyo, baka may Anisakis pala. And they are seen this way. Okay, let's go to the life cycle. And then as we discussed, we'll mention na yung mga important items that were listed in our previous slide. So, Anisakis is a natural, or it's really a parasite of marine animals or marine species. Basically, mga isda, okay? Para siya sa mga fishes and marine mammals, etc. So, para talaga siya sa mga nakatira sa tubig. We'll begin here. So, step number 1, the unembryonated eggs of Anisakis are released in the water. And so, they are released in the water. And then, while in the water, they will become infective and embryonated. But the interesting thing about Anisakis is that yung L3 filariform, they already develop while inside the egg. Previously, kasi di ba dapat rhabditiform, tapos magha-hatch, and then magiging filariform. But for Anisakis, yung L3 filariform, it can already be found inside the embryonated egg of Anisakis. From here, the eggs will hatch, releasing the L3 larva, and then our first intermediate host, and the intermediate host will ingest these larvae. So what is our intermediate host? Crustaceans or microcrustaceans such as shrimps. So the shrimps will eat the larvae and become infected. The parasite will then further develop into in the intestine of the shrimp. But then, this shrimp will eventually be eaten by fish. However, etong fish, we don't call it second intermediate host because they don't really contribute to the development of Anisakis. Again, fish or fishes do not contribute to the development of Anisakis. Therefore, the more appropriate term for them would be paratenic host. Okay, again, ang mga fish po ay paratenic hosts only of Anisakis species. So, ano mangyayari sa kanya? Paano siya magiging adult? Kailangan merong marine mammal, okay, na kakain dun sa isdang yun. So, marine mammals include dolphins, whales, seals, walruses. So, they have to eat the paratenic host until the Anisakis do not reach the natural or intended final host via food chain, wala po mangyayari sa kanila. Magiging forever larva lang sila. So, okay, once it is eaten by the marine mammal, there they can become adults and then fertilize, copulate, and produce the new generation of unembryonated eggs. So, that is the natural life cycle of Anisakis. Kailan naman pumapasok yung humans? Okay? Because we also eat fish, we can also become infected. But just like what we have mentioned dahil hindi naman tayo marine mammal, hindi naman tayo dolphin or whale, ganun din, paratenic host din tayo. We cannot contribute to their development. And so when we eat the larva, it stays the same until it is diagnosed and until it is removed from the body. So, ang tawag sa atin ay paratenic host or accidental or incidental paratenic host. We can also describe ourselves as dead-end host kasi wala na siyang pupuntahan. Hindi na siya magmamature kaya dead-end na yung life cycle niya while they inhabit or while they reside in our bodies. The only way it can continue if hypothetically or theoretically may kakain sa atin na dolphin or na whale. But if that will not happen, and that is a very rare thing to occur, medyo imposible yon, hindi na po siya magko-continue. Kaya dead-end host din tayo. For the diagnosis, anong sabi natin? It will remain the same. Larva pa din siya until it is removed from the body. How is it removed? Gastroscopy, surgery, or simply vomiting. Isusuka natin siya. While they are in their body, it cannot really reside or parang wala siyang permanent residence, but they reside in the gastrointestinal tract. Palibot-libot lang siya doon. And ayun. So while it is in the gastrointestinal tract, it can cause abdominal pain, peritoneal irritation, granulomatous reaction, part of our response or part of the response of our immune system, and also thickening of the intestinal wall. However, some infections are only temporary, and so this is called transient anisakiasis or transient anisakidosis. In those cases, since we are not the intended host, ayaw niya din sa atin. Kung ayaw mo sa kanya, ayaw niya din sa'yo. And in these cases, they are just ejected from our body via vomiting. So, ayun. Since wala naman siya mapapala sa atin, aalis na lang siya via vomiting. Or based din to our response also. Based on our response to the presence of the worm. Another clinical manifestation of this parasite would be tingling throat syndrome. Sabi natin kanina, it's very large. It can get up to several centimeters long. So as we eat the raw fish or undercooked fish, the larva is still moving. Kaya parang may barado sa ating lalamunan, causing tingling throat syndrome. Yun pala, yun na yung worm that is moving as it is being swallowed and being eaten. Kaya ang tawag doon ay tingling throat syndrome. For the treatment, surgery and gastroscopic removal is possible, but we can also kill them using albendazole. Preventive measure is, of course, proper preparation and proper cooking of fish. Ayan. And paalala lang po na it's okay to eat yung mga delicacies natin. Just make sure that you prepare them very well. And also, you ensure na raw fish yan. You get it from a reputable or a reliable supplier. Okay, dapat maganda yung fishery nila. Walang mga Anisakis doon sa mga kung saan sila binibreed. Yun lang naman po ang ating reminder. Yan. So kung mahilig ka sa salmon or sa sashimi, sa sushi, go ahead. Just make sure na maayos yung mga fish na ginagamit nyo. Ayan. And that ends our discussion on the intestinal nematodes that are number 1, acquired via skin penetration. And then number 2, yung mga miscellaneous intestinal nematodes. So that ends our discussion for this week. I hope you enjoy and stay tuned for more videos or more lectures during the 61st founding anniversary. So thank you so much for watching and for listening, and I hope you learned a lot.